My husband vanished during labor. My brother told him I was gone. Hey everyone, I don't even know how to start this. My name's Sarah, and up until last week, I thought I had a pretty solid life. I'm 31, married to my husband, Ethan, for 5 years. We have a little girl on the way, well, had, because this all started literally a week before she was born. I guess I should back up. Ethan and I met at work, and he's always been the super logical, steady guy. The kind of guy who plans every little thing, double-checks the locks on the doors, and keeps an Excel spreadsheet for literally everything. I used to find that kind of endearing, like, oh, look at him being so organized while I'm over here forgetting where I put my car keys. But lately, I don't know. Anyway, last week we were sitting on the couch after dinner, me awkwardly trying to find a comfortable position because pregnancy at 39 weeks is no joke. I was telling him about the baby kicking, just small talk, and out of nowhere, he hits me with this sentence that completely blindsided me. Sarah, I think we should get a paternity test after the baby's born. At first, I thought I misheard him. Like, maybe my brain was fried from the lack of sleep or something. I laughed because surely he was joking, right? But no. He was dead serious. He said it so calmly, like he was suggesting we should pick up milk on the way home or something. I don't even know how to describe the way I felt in that moment. Hurt doesn't quite cover it. It was like my chest caved in, and I couldn't breathe. I asked him, I begged him, to explain what the hell he was talking about. And you know what he said? He just shrugged and said, I just think it's better to be 100% sure. Better to be sure? Sure about what? We've been married for 5 years. I've never given him any reason to doubt me. I don't go out late. I don't even have close male friends because, well, Ethan's always been the type to get a little possessive. And now, a week before I'm about to give birth to our daughter, he drops this on me? I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my voice shaking. I asked him if he was accusing me of cheating, and he just kept repeating the same line about wanting to be sure. It was like talking to a brick wall. I asked him if he even understood how hurtful what he was saying was, and he just brushed it off like I was being dramatic. He said something about how it's not personal, which, like, how could it not be personal? That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation in my head. I mean, what kind of person asks for a paternity test out of nowhere? Did he not trust me? Did he not want our baby? I felt so sick to my stomach, and not just because of the pregnancy. I thought about calling my older brother, Jack, but it was late, and I didn't want to wake him up. Jack's my rock. He's 36, married to his high school sweetheart, Emma, and they've always been like this perfect example of what a healthy relationship should look like. I didn't want to admit to him that my marriage was turning into whatever this mess was. The next morning, things didn't get any better. Ethan acted like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just had this massive blow-up. I couldn't even look at him without tearing up. I packed a bag and called Jack. I told him everything, and he was furious. Like, full-on I'm coming over there right now furious. I had to convince him to stay put because I just needed a place to crash, not a scene. So now, I'm staying in Jack and Emma's guest room, trying to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do. Ethan's been texting me, acting like I'm overreacting, but I don't even know how to respond. How do you fix something like this? Or can you even fix it? I don't know, guys. I've got a million thoughts running through my head, and I feel like I'm drowning. If anyone's been through something even remotely similar, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Right now, I just feel so lost. So, a couple of days later, I had to go back home to grab some stuff I forgot, basic things like my prenatal vitamins, my favorite sweatshirt, and the hospital bag I had stupidly left behind in all the chaos. I wasn't planning on seeing Ethan. In fact, I was kind of hoping he'd be at work so I could just sneak in and out. Jack offered to come with me, but I told him I'd be fine. Honestly, I just wanted to avoid any drama. Of course, life had other plans. When I walked through the door, the house felt off. I don't really know how to explain it. Maybe it was just my emotions messing with me, or maybe I was hyper-aware of everything because of all the stress, but the place felt cold. I grabbed my stuff as quickly as I could, and as I was heading out, I felt this sharp, deep pain in my stomach. Like, holy crap, something's wrong kind of pain. At first, I thought it was just another Braxton Hicks contraction. They've been hitting me a lot lately, but this one didn't go away. It just kept getting worse. I dropped my bag and leaned against the wall, trying to breathe through it, but then my knees buckled, and I realized, oh my God, this is it. I panicked. Obviously. I mean, I'm standing in the middle of my living room, alone, about to have a baby, and my husband, the guy who's supposed to be my person, is nowhere to be found. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I tried a third time, nearly screaming into the phone, but still nothing. I don't think I've ever felt so helpless in my life. I was crying, shaking, and trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't even know how long it would take for them to get there, and I couldn't exactly wait around. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Jack. I don't even remember what I said when he picked up. Something like, "It's happening, I need you now." He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'm on my way," and hung up. I sat on the floor, clutching my stomach, trying to breathe through the pain. Every second felt like an hour. Jack lives about 15 minutes away, but it felt like forever before he got there. By the time he pulled up, I could barely stand. He practically carried me to the car, and we sped off toward the hospital. Except, we didn't make it. About halfway there, I knew the baby wasn't waiting. I was screaming at this point, telling Jack to pull over because I could feel her coming, and I was not about to give birth in a moving car. Jack, bless him, started freaking out but managed to pull into some random parking lot. I don't even know where we were, some diner, maybe, but it didn't matter. Jack jumped out, ran to my side, and started doing his best to, well, deliver a baby. I mean, look, he's not a doctor. He's not even the calm in a crisis type. But he stepped up in a way I will never forget. He was talking me through it, trying to keep me calm even though I could see the pure panic in his eyes. And then, in what felt like the most surreal moment of my entire life, I heard her cry. My baby girl. Jack wrapped her in his flannel shirt and handed her to me, and for a split second, everything else disappeared. But then reality came crashing back. I was bleeding. A lot. I remember Jack yelling something about getting help, and then everything went fuzzy. I don't remember much after that, just flashes, paramedics, bright lights, someone saying something about surgery. And then nothing. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My throat was dry, my body felt like it had been hit by a truck, and Jack was sitting next to me, holding my hand. I tried to ask what happened, but my voice came out as a whisper. He told me I'd had a postpartum hemorrhage and lost a lot of blood. They'd managed to save me, but they'd had to perform an emergency hysterectomy. I don't even know how to process that. I mean, I'm grateful to be alive, of course, but the idea that I'll never be able to have another child, it's a lot. It's so much. And where was Ethan? Oh, right. Still missing in action. Apparently, Jack had been trying to reach him the entire time. He finally called Emma, who managed to dig up Ethan's work emergency contact info and left a message for him. Ethan didn't call back until hours later, after I was out of surgery. Jack, being Jack, picked up the phone and told him, "She's gone." I know. It was cruel. But honestly, I don't blame him. Jack was livid, like, ready to throw hands livid, and he wanted Ethan to feel even a fraction of the pain I'd gone through. Ethan showed up at the hospital not long after that, and Jack refused to let him in. Security got involved, and it turned into this whole scene. By the time I woke up, Ethan was still in the waiting room, demanding to see me. And you know what? I told the nurses not to let him in. I don't know, maybe that makes me a terrible person. But in that moment, I couldn't deal with him. I couldn't deal with his excuses or his explanations or whatever half-assed apology he was going to throw at me. He wasn't there when I needed him most, when our daughter needed him most, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive that. So there I was, lying in that hospital bed, barely holding it together. My body was wrecked, my emotions were all over the place, and every time I looked at my daughter, who they'd brought in to lie next to me in her little bassinet, I felt this overwhelming mixture of love and heartbreak. She was perfect, absolutely perfect. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened to bring her into the world. How I'd been alone, how Jack had been the one to step up, and how Ethan had been, well, gone. I could hear Ethan in the hallway, arguing with the nurses. His voice was sharp, cutting, angrier than I'd ever heard him. I think he was mad at Jack for lying about me being gone, but honestly, I didn't care. Jack had been there when it mattered. Ethan hadn't. He could have been mad at Jack, at the nurses, at the universe for all I cared. It wasn't going to change what had happened. Eventually, the nurse came in to ask me if I wanted to let Ethan in. I just shook my head. I couldn't deal with him. I was too exhausted, too hurt, and frankly, too angry. The nurse nodded and left, and I could hear her calmly explaining to Ethan that I wasn't ready to see him. That didn't go over well. He started shouting, and I could hear him saying things like, "She's my wife, and she can't just refuse to see me." But you know what? I could. And I did. Jack came back in not long after that, looking a little too smug for someone who just had a screaming match in the hospital waiting room. He sat down in the chair next to me and said, "Don't worry, they've got security on him. He's not coming in unless you want him to." For a moment, I thought about telling Jack to ease up, that maybe he was being too harsh. But then I remembered lying on that living room floor, bleeding and terrified, calling Ethan over and over again with no answer. I remembered the paternity test bombshell, the cold way he'd said he just wanted to be sure. And any sympathy I might have felt for him vanished. Jack stayed with me the whole night, and Emma came by the next morning with coffee and snacks. She brought a little onesie for my daughter that said, "Strong like mommy," and I almost burst into tears right there. I don't know what I would have done without them. They were my rock through all of this, and seeing them with my daughter, seeing the way they loved her without hesitation, just solidified everything for me. This was what family looked like. Not doubt. Not absence. Just love. Ethan, meanwhile, was spiraling. I got a text from him that night, just one, after all those missed calls. It said, "We need to talk. This is ridiculous. Jack is out of control." Out of control? Seriously? He was blaming Jack for everything, as if it wasn't his own choices that had led us here. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? "Sorry my brother stepped up when you didn't?" Yeah, no. The days passed, and I started piecing myself back together, physically and emotionally. It wasn't easy. Recovering from surgery was brutal. I could barely move without feeling like my insides were tearing apart, and every time I tried to look at the big picture, my marriage, my future, I felt this heavy, crushing weight settle over me. Ethan kept trying to reach me, though. He left voicemails, sent texts, even emailed me. The messages ranged from apologetic to furious to downright desperate. He blamed Jack for turning me against him, accused me of running away instead of facing our issues, and then, because of course he did, he doubled down on the paternity test thing. He said it wasn't about me, that it was just a precaution, and that I was blowing things out of proportion. I don't know what he thought that was going to accomplish. If anything, it just made me angrier. It was like he didn't even understand what he'd done, how deeply he'd hurt me. How could I trust someone who couldn't even acknowledge the damage he'd caused? Jack, meanwhile, had no intention of backing down. He was angrier than I was, if that's even possible. He told me, in no uncertain terms, that Ethan didn't deserve another chance. That he'd shown who he really was when it mattered most, and that I'd be setting myself up for a lifetime of disappointment if I let him back in. And honestly, Jack wasn't wrong. I started thinking about what I wanted for my daughter. What kind of environment I wanted her to grow up in. Did I want her to grow up watching her mother constantly doubting herself, constantly bending over backward to fix something that might already be broken beyond repair? Or did I want to show her what it looked like to stand up for yourself, to choose love and respect over fear and obligation? It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. I called a lawyer. Her name was Rachel, and she came recommended by one of Emma's friends who'd been through a rough divorce herself. I explained everything: Ethan's sudden demand for a paternity test, his absence during the birth, the way he tried to gaslight me afterward. Rachel listened without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally nodding like, "Yep, I've seen this before." When I was done spilling my guts, she leaned forward and said, "Sarah, you've been through hell. Let's make sure you don't have to stay there." I almost cried. Like, full-on ugly cried. I'd been holding so much inside, trying to survive, trying to stay strong for my daughter, but hearing someone say that, hearing someone validate what I was feeling, it was like a dam broke inside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning anymore. Rachel explained the process to me. The divorce, the custody arrangements, everything. She asked me if I wanted to pursue sole custody, and I hesitated. As much as I hated Ethan for what he'd done, I didn't want to be unfair. He was still Lily's father. Yeah, I finally decided on a name for her, Lily Grace. Jack and Emma helped me pick it out while I was recovering. It just felt right. The next step was telling Ethan. I dreaded it, obviously. I knew he wasn't going to take it well, and I was right. The moment I told him I'd filed for divorce, he exploded. He showed up at Jack's house uninvited, pounding on the door and demanding to talk to me. I was in the living room feeding Lily when I heard Jack shout, "You're not coming in here, Ethan. She doesn't want to see you." Ethan shouted back, "She's my wife, Jack. You don't get to make that decision for her." Jack laughed, like, actually laughed, and said, "Funny, you didn't seem too concerned about her when she was bleeding out in the backseat of my car." That shut Ethan up for about 2 seconds, but then he started accusing Jack of turning me against him, saying all this crap about how Jack was interfering in our marriage. I wanted to stay out of it, but when Ethan started yelling so loud that Lily started crying, I couldn't take it anymore. I handed Lily to Emma and walked to the door. "Ethan, stop," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You're scaring her." He turned to me, and for a split second, he looked broken. Like he didn't understand how we'd gotten here. But then his expression hardened, and he said, Sarah, this isn't you. This is him. Jack has been filling your head with lies, and you're letting him ruin our family. That was it. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. Because Ethan still didn't get it. He didn't understand that this wasn't about Jack. It wasn't about anyone but him and the choices he'd made. The doubt, the absence, the way he'd refused to take responsibility for any of it, it was all on him. This isn't Jack's fault, I said. It's yours. You're the one who didn't answer your phone. You're the one who demanded a paternity test out of nowhere. You're the one who wasn't there when I needed you. And now you're blaming everyone but yourself. He tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. No. I'm done. I've already filed for divorce, Ethan. You can fight it if you want, but I'm not changing my mind. The look on his face. I don't even know how to describe it. It was this mix of anger, disbelief, and desperation. He opened his mouth to say something, but Jack stepped in and said, "You've said enough. Time to go." Ethan left after that, but not without slamming the door so hard I thought the hinges might break. I stood there for a moment, shaking, trying to catch my breath. Jack put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing." I nodded, but in that moment, I didn't feel brave or strong. I just felt sad. Sad for what I'd lost, for what Lily would never have, for the life I thought I was going to have with Ethan that was now completely gone. But underneath that sadness, there was something else. Relief. Because now, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The weeks after I told Ethan were a whirlwind, to say the least. He didn't take the divorce news lying down, but I expected that. He dragged things out as much as he could, sending me long-winded texts about how I was tearing apart our family and acting irrationally. For a guy who prides himself on being logical, he had a real knack for emotional manipulation. But I didn't engage. I let Rachel handle the legal side of things, and I focused on what mattered most, Lily. Lily was my anchor through all of this. Every time I looked at her tiny face, I felt like I'd made the right decision. She deserved a mom who was happy, who was strong, who didn't settle for a relationship built on mistrust and doubt. And while part of me still mourned what could have been, I knew deep down that Ethan and I had reached a point of no return. Jack and Emma were my lifeline during those weeks. I don't know how I would have managed without them. Jack was there for the late-night feedings when I couldn't keep my eyes open, and Emma made sure I actually ate something other than hospital graham crackers. They even rearranged their spare room to make space for Lily's crib and changing table, turning it into a little nursery. Every time I walked in there, I felt this overwhelming gratitude for them. They didn't just open their home to me, they made me feel like family, like I wasn't alone. Ethan, on the other hand, kept digging himself a deeper hole. He tried to guilt me into dropping the divorce, saying things like, "You owe it to Lily to keep our family together." But I knew better. Staying in a toxic relationship wouldn't do Lily any favors. If anything, it would teach her that it's okay to settle for less than you deserve, and I couldn't let that happen. The custody battle was brutal, though. Ethan initially pushed for joint custody, but Rachel and I weren't having it. I couldn't trust him to be consistent, let alone responsible enough to care for a newborn. Rachel built a strong case against him, citing his absence during the birth and his erratic behavior afterward. Eventually, Ethan backed down, agreeing to supervised visitation for now. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. But when I signed those papers, I felt lighter than I had in months. It wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of something new. Something better. One day, a few weeks after everything was settled, I was sitting on the couch with Lily asleep on my chest when Jack came in with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one and said, "You know, you're a hell of a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for." I laughed, mostly because I didn't feel strong. I felt tired and messy and still a little broken. But Jack just shook his head. "I mean it, Sarah. You went through hell, and you came out the other side. That's strength." I don't know why, but that hit me hard. I started crying, like, full-on ugly crying, and Jack just sat there, not saying anything, letting me get it out. It wasn't the kind of cry that comes from sadness, though. It was more like release. Like I was finally letting go of all the pain and fear and anger I'd been carrying for so long. After that, things slowly started to fall into place. I moved into a small apartment not far from Jack and Emma's place. It wasn't much, a little 2-bedroom with creaky floors and outdated cabinets, but it was mine. I decorated Lily's room with soft pinks and yellows, hung up some pictures of flowers and rainbows, and filled her bookshelves with all the stories I couldn't wait to read to her. It was a fresh start, and I leaned into it with everything I had. Ethan still sees Lily during his supervised visits, and while I'll always have complicated feelings about him, I've come to accept that he's still her father. I don't want her to grow up resenting him, but I also don't sugarcoat things. When she's old enough to ask questions, I'll tell her the truth in a way she can understand. For now, I focus on being the best mom I can be.